Welcome to the latest edition of Ed Talks, podcast which we do monthly to try and talk to interesting people in the property industry. I always try and get people on the podcast who interest me and represent businesses that interest me. And the guy I have in today, Tim Price, is Vice President of Sales at OneDome, a company called OneDome, and is also in charge of their business development and partnerships. And I think for our estate agent listenership, OneDome is a company which they've probably heard of, but they don't necessarily know exactly what it does. And I've been fascinated by what I think they do for quite some time, because I think that the estate agency community as a whole is often fairly slow at adopting new technology or thinking about how they can improve the way in which they work. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, pleasure.
And before we start, it's always good to get a little bit of an idea of your background. We were talking a little bit off air. We've met once or twice in the past.
We have,
and I'm fascinated to hear a little bit about how you arrived at OneDome. So give me a little bit of, or give our listeners, I should say, a little bit of an idea of who you are.
Right. Blimey, where do I start? As you know, my early career was spent in the armed forces, so still the best company car I've ever had, which was a Challenger tank at the time. I then made the decision after my 6 and a bit years to go for a career in a estate agency. So I started in what was an independent business at the time, Parker's, in glorious Basingstoke, right on the back end of double Myris. So my timing's not always been impeccable.
For people who don't, there will be a lot of people listening here, Tim, who aren't quite our age. Double Myris, for those who don't know, was the Tory government suddenly decided it was about 1988, 89, they were going to stop double interest relief on mortgages. So if you had a mortgage with a partner, you could add both of your allowances together and get a really pretty phenomenal deal on your mortgage, and the government decided to stop it, which of course led to the most enormous rush of people to buy and get mortgages.
It was quite busy, yeah.
It was quite busy, so lovely artificial situation. The opposite of what we've had for the last few years with stamp duty.
Quite, yeah, very much so.
So, so Parker's?
Yeah, Parker's. That business was then acquired by Legal & General. I did what most people do in a estate agency, kind of started as a junior neg, which in those days was basically being involved, as a lot of people our age in the industry that started at the same time. I remember being chained to some type of photocopier or another, especially on mail-out day, which was all very manual with dot matrix photos and very much pre-internet. It was very much about a day book, a phone, a viewing book and a diary, and that was the only toolkit needed to be an estate agent, along with a sharp mind and the ability to work very hard. So that was my entry point. I worked my way up. I had my own business for a while. I was, if not the very first, if not one of the first franchisees of Legal & General. Way back when, we actually took over the fleet office, myself and a colleague of Parker's, ran that successfully for a number of years, sold that business. I then ended up working for L&G head office at Kingswood, alongside Peter Brodnicki, who's the chief exec of MAB, who you'll probably know quite well, and a number of your listeners will know. And our job there was to help agents and brokers basically develop their financial services business. And I did that, ended up becoming the head of estate agency network for L&G. And then I went into the world of conveyancing. So Rob Sendall, who again a lot of your listeners will know quite well, who'd started a business called the Live Organisation, used to pester me quite regularly to come and work with him. And in the end, he's very persuasive. I gave in. And we very successfully made a lot of agents a lot of money.
And was that within the Legal & General umbrella still, or was that
No,
separate?
It wasn't. I first met Rob through the L&G link. He'd not long started Live, and he was obviously looking for traction and a way of sort of promoting his new conveyancing service, which was pretty revolutionary back then. It's quite a common model now, however. But it was pretty much invented by Rob back in the day.
Well, it's pretty common, isn't it? But it's worth mentioning that back then the idea that estate agents could make money out of getting people mortgages and insurance services and earning money from their solicitor services. I mean, in the old days when I started in the late 70s, you would recommend a solicitor.
Yes.
And you'd have solicitors you dealt with.
But you get a bottle of scotch at Christmas.
I was about to say that was about it, whereas nowadays, it's no coincidence that, for instance, I think 2 years ago, the countrywide figures showed that for every £1 countrywide earned in estate agency services, they earned another 43p in financial services or in referral fees, which is phenomenal. So you were at the sort of cutting edge of that, really. And we'll come on to the way that OneDome helps people utilise that.
Yeah, very much so,
actually, the experience that I have found since I left Douglas and Gordon 3 years ago is very much that the bigger corporate agents, and of course Legal & General would have fallen under that remit or under that description, were so much better at servicing that side of the industry than independent agents are. And of course independent agents are the majority,
very much
yet
so.
they've always been very, very bad at doing so, at earning fees from these other services, and indeed even being able to recommend them. And of course that is partly what OneDome does. It's part of that remit. So it's fascinating that, probably without realising it, that's all a really big part of what you do now, presumably.
Yeah, very much so. An incredibly big part. I mean, it's as much about revenue generation, but that needs to be balanced with control of your sales pipeline and giving agents a better sort of operational flow within their own business. And basically, their fee for selling the house is obviously far more important to them than earning a few £100 out of a conveyancing referral. But getting the right balance, it's very achievable to have both.
Well, especially, of course, if the services you're recommending are good ones.
Yes, and very much if they're yours.
I was about to say, there's obviously no point in recommending a duff service because it's just not going to work. So from that perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's all relationships, Ed. That's what these, all these successful operations are kind of built on, just successful people relationships, and it's just about helping to connect them better together. Absolutely,
and people build up a reputation. I mean, I'm fascinated. I had no idea that your background was quite so varied, and obviously bearing in mind what you do now, it sort of explains
a bit of a Swiss Army knife.
I mean, it sort of explains why what you do is so useful. Let's talk a little bit about how you arrived at OneDome. I mean, I think you've been there now, a couple of years, is it now?
Yeah, just over 2 years.
Yeah, just over 2 years, and the business started a little bit before that.
Just over 3 years ago.
Over 3 years ago. And I don't think I've ever met someone with more energy or more, I don't know what the right word is, obsession, really, than the founder of OneDome, a guy called Babak. Ishmael, who's an extraordinary guy. I remember when I first started talking to him a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, just after they'd founded. He was getting married, and I remember ringing him on honeymoon. I remember ringing him, and I had no idea. He said, I'm sorry, I'm on honeymoon. I said, well, why haven't you turned your phone off? But the fact is, I know from having started up a business myself that the amount of obsessive work that has to go into doing it to start with is absolutely never ending. But his background actually was in the financial services sector.
Well, it was JP Morgan,
yeah, and obviously the business has great backing, but it doesn't matter how much backing you've got in a business unless you execute properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that the business has been through a few iterations in terms of exactly what it wanted to do. And as businesses do, they suddenly not pivot. I do hate that expression, but they sort of go down a different route. And actually, I remember when you arrived there, I thought that was great news. I thought it was a really good move. And I'm not surprised. I think it sounds like an even better move given what I've heard about your background. But I think there'll be a lot of people out there who have probably now heard of OneDome, because actually OneDome did an awful lot of sponsorship, and they were sponsoring a lot of they sponsored a lot of the shows. We negotiated EA Masters, this sort of thing. But I think perhaps what a lot of people don't necessarily understand is what the business was originally set up to do. I think the latest bit, which we'll come on to talk to in a minute, which is the portal, free-to-list portal. Babak, I know, has spent a lot of time trying to work out what he thinks a portal should be or could be. Perhaps I hate using the word should. But in terms of the basic product that OneDome offers out to estate agents to use, can you give me a little bit of a heads up on what it is that they do?
Yeah, I mean, you used the word pivot earlier. Yeah, I'm like you. I don't like that word either. I mean, I think the business started with a very clear vision, which was to basically improve the experience for a consumer buying or selling a property. Because, quite frankly, in today's modern world, property is really the biggest transaction that most people will actually get involved in, but also the most opaque when it comes to communication, transparency, and I think consumers are far more used to using technology to solve some quite small problems for themselves, but also now they're more used to engaging with technology to actually solve some quite big, complex problems for themselves. And really, with Babek's background, he was very successful at JP, and he can clearly spot, markets and opportunities. It's what traders do, right? And when it came to the property market, which was ironically an element of what he was involved in at his time at JP, the opportunity was so glaringly obvious that there was just this massive gaping hole in the property market in general. Now, there's been technology around, for estate agents for a number of years. A little bit of technology around in the conveyancing arena for some of those partners. And I think this is where the problem lies. There's so many interdependent elements of a property transaction, none of which really connect together very well, talk to each other very well. Certain parts of the industry don't like the other side of the industry, et cetera, et cetera. It's all quite well known and documented. But he admirably, took on the challenge of trying to provide one platform so a consumer could have a single login, so a single username and password that would actually then enable them to manage the entire process from start to finish. We obviously had to start with a roadmap of some description. I preferred the word roadmap because it does change, and we've had to evolve from where we first started in terms of how some of the technology worked. The fundamental pieces of technology are still in place, but there's been an awful lot of iteration and improvement over, certainly in the time I've been there, in the last 2 years.
Because it's important for people to understand that, of course, and our listenership will understand that when a consumer, and when you talk about a consumer, you mean a member of the public who's buying a property.
Yes.
They have to deal with so many different elements. They have to deal with the estate agent, or the person who's selling them the home. They have to deal with their finance element, and they have to deal with the conveyancing element. So what you're talking about is making one platform that makes it possible to deal with all of those. That's what it is, basically.
Absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, which is, think of a buyer's to-do list, really. It's whether you're buying a small masonette somewhere or a 9-bedroom country home, your to-do list as a buyer is pretty much the same. Everybody's got the same real-world life things to sort out as part of any move. And we wanted to provide them with a platform that helped them. So there's an awful lot of moving parts. Trying to think the best analogy for OneDome, you've got consumers on one side, i.e. a marketplace of consumers, buyers and sellers. You've got a marketplace, the B2B side, which is the estate agents, and within that, other elements of that, which are conveyancers. Think of OneDome like a gearbox that kind of sits in the middle, that's trying to mesh those different turning wheels that are all turning in different directions and at different speeds. So trying to be the single piece of technology that can help a buyer or a seller is very challenging. I mean, I heard back in the day, I guess one-stop shop used to be the term that a lot of agents used to like talking about when it came to other parts of the transaction, whether it be mortgages or conveyancing. So it's a very similar process, but trying to do that with technology, but trying to do it in the right way where you deliver a very consistent, nice experience for the consumer, but also do it in a way where the agents aren't under threat. In fact, we're actually trying to help them. We're not trying to steal their livelihood or turn them into robo-negs or anything like that. There's nothing crazy going on. We're just trying to better connect their customers with them and the transaction. So
what would you describe as the biggest difficulty you face in selling that message to agents? Because on the face of it, it makes sense. I understand what you're talking about. What's the biggest resistance that you get?
I think the biggest challenge we have is, you mentioned it earlier, it's the pace at which really the B2B side of our business, which is the estate agency side. It's the pace at which they actually do react to some of the opportunities that are out there. And they have a habit of being the ostriches, burying their head in the sand and wait for somebody else in the high street to do something before they might react and either copy that guy or jump on board and seek an alternative that does the same thing. Whereas the consumers actually are the easiest sell in the world for us. You describe what OneDome is or allow a consumer into OneDome and they love it. It's a no-brainer because it's actually solving so many problems.
But of course, you have the same problem that a lot of tech businesses have, even though Babek is better funded than many, which is, of course, that if you could advertise, if you could spend £4 million a month on TV ads to tell everyone in the world how marvellous OneDome is, and then everyone would then go to their estate agent and say, why aren't you using this OneDome, guys? The estate agents would use it. But of course, you don't. Most people in your position don't have that luxury. They're marketing to the agents.
Yes.
And it's very, very difficult sometimes to persuade the agents that what you're offering is going to improve their lives. My experience of dealing with estate agents when you're trying to sell them tech, or selling them tech is a ridiculous way, selling them a better way of doing things that happens to involve a technological solution, is that it takes a very, very long time, exactly as you said.
Yes.
I mean, Vuber, my particular business, which I started up, has been going now over 3 years, and it's taken us 3 years, literally, since I first started talking to people, for them to come back round and say, actually, I see what you're doing now, can we, and they start using you.
Yeah. We've had exactly the same conversations, I think, where OneDome is, for it to make sense, I guess, for the agents, there's options within OneDome now. When we very first started as a business, we had a collection of tools which can sit on the estate agent's website, which were booking tools, so book valuation, book viewing, and an instant valuation tool which generated valuation leads. And there's a number of those type of tools out there in the marketplace. And I think that's what OneDome kind of got known for in its early iteration. But while they were out in the field being sold to estate agents, we were busy developing the rest of the roadmap. So when you actually started talking about the vision of OneDome, in the early days of OneDome, it didn't really make sense to the agents because the consumer side wasn't there. There was a consumer experience in making a viewing appointment, which was great, but what's the point of then? Where's the transaction?
Yes, it was a question I used to hear, was what does OneDome do?
Yeah.
So you talk about the development of the roadmap. So what was next then?
Conveyancing was next. And rather than another Me Too type solution, which the agents have, there's many conveyancing solutions out there, and I've worked for some of them, as you know. But we wanted to try and fix as many problems with the conveyancing as we possibly could. And connectivity was a fairly simple one, which is more of a quote and instruct type part of it.
So that's connecting the consumer with the best in class of the conveyancer, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or giving the agent the ability of either providing a quote and the ability to instruct online for their customers. So the beauty of OneDome is that the agents can either sort of pull people in, i.e. invite them right into the transaction, or if that customer's already engaged with OneDome, already has an account, we're already proving that consumers are quite happy to actually engage with that part of the service themselves, where they feel empowered to look at a marketplace, select their own provider.
But the agent would still earn from that.
Absolutely.
Is the point, isn't it?
And in many cases, that marketplace of suppliers is in control of the agent. It's their relationships, and relationships are key.
So what you're saying is that the estate agent can either decide to put their own conveyancers on the system, or they can utilise the best in class that OneDome has selected for them. Sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And either way, they earn from it. Okay, I understand. That's okay. That's clearer. Okay, so that was the next bit of the roadmap, was to enable the conveyancing side of it, perhaps in a more modern way, so that people could interact. I mean, is there anything that you do that actually helps speed up the transaction? Because obviously, when people talk about conveyancing, and you mentioned earlier how different parts of the industry hate's probably too strong a word, but are reticent to praise, let's put it like that, the other sides of the industry.
Polite, yeah.
You know, the Actually, I was talking to Andrew Montley, better known as Monty, yesterday about this, and he was talking about how
I know Monty well.
how the mortgage business has got much, much better, and it's very fast, and it's the conveyancers that always slow things down. You talk to the conveyancers, and they'll say, well, it's always the finance side and getting the mortgage offer that slows things down. So when you talk about the conveyancing side as being part of the roadmap, is there any specific part of that OneDome does that could help speed up the process?
Yeah, that we're not making any wild claims, but I think a lot, not all, but a lot of the conveyancing solutions out there for the estate agent, even if they can use their own partners, it's no more than just a quotation tool. So it's a way of putting a price list in front of their customer and a way of digitally sort of instructing said lawyer or conveyancer. That conveyancing business is then either processing that transaction by shuffling an awful lot of paper around, which, believe it or not, still a lot of these businesses do that way, carrier pigeons and quill pens, or they're using some software, a case management, from a variety of case management systems out there for the conveyancers. The problem with a lot of those solutions is that everybody's not connected. They're in the dark,
which is one of the big problems. Isn't
it is, yeah. It's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
That's the opaque layer that kind of sort of is there in the actual property transactions.
The words turkey and Christmas sort of come to mind, don't they? Unfortunately,
yeah. This podcast is probably a good time of year for this.
Yeah.
So, how a lot of the I don't want to sound as though I'm knocking some of the conveyancing business, because I don't intend to, but and there's some very good ones out there, but most of those platforms are a fairly basic milestone update portal. So conveyancers processing the case, however they're doing it.
And just letting the customer and the agent know with a simple notification online. Sort of
but they have to remember to then log into said panel manager. It's normally a panel manager that's providing that functionality or that piece of technology. They have to remember to log into that portal to put a tick in a box and maybe write a note, a little case note, and post. That tends to, in my experience, raise more questions than it actually provides answers by both the agent and normally the consumer. But also, they're not up to date. So, in my experience, having actually worked for one of those, they're typically 7 to 14 days actually out of date. So the actual technology that's there supposed to be as a layer of communication, nobody really trusts.
So how does your tech speed that up then?
Well, there's a big difference with OneDome in the fact that the conveyancing is actually carried out on OneDome by the conveyancer. So that's the only requirement that we have for the conveyancing partners involved. We don't charge them for that technology. It's completely free for them to use.
Okay, but it auto-updates is the point.
Yes. So basically, in layman's terms, everybody is connected to a real-time event.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? Because I think the utopia for these sort of systems has to be so that any stakeholder in the process can log on and see where it is. That's it, period. So whether you're the conveyancer, the buyer, the seller, the agent, anybody involved, even, for heaven's sake, the sort of removals man, you need to be able to log on and see, right, when's this going to complete, when can I book? All that stuff gets taken out of it. It leaves time for the agent, the conveyancer, everybody else to do more and better business.
Absolutely. I think importantly as well, it gives us an opportunity of providing the right data in the right way to the right person. So what I mean is the estate agent involved actually understands, let's say, searches. They know what searches are. If you're involved in sales progression, you know that there's actually more than one search involved. You know what these things sometimes can take in terms of time. Whereas your average consumer out there hasn't got a clue. They know that they've paid for something with their conveyancer and they can't move without it. But they don't actually understand what these things are or really what's involved. And sometimes that can lead them to have unrealistic expectations, which causes problems because they start blaming people for not doing things. Sure. So the technology allows us to present and manage some of those consumer expectations in a way that we can disseminate the data and provide a consumer view of that, which is much easier to understand. You can provide them a breakdown also and an explanation of what these things are, so everybody's a little bit better educated. Whereas with an estate agent or a professional, you can actually provide them some normal data, if you like.
Sure. I mean, I get that. I mean, obviously, I would assume your problems with getting people to use the system are the same as you have with people, i.e. conveyancers using the system is the same with agents. They're very, very slow to adapt and to change. And there's an extra reason, which, of course, is, if we eventually arrive in a situation where you can buy a property by pushing a button, clearly the people that have been pushing the quills and the whatever around are going to find life a lot more difficult.
Well, we have a number of agents now using us for conveyancing, some of which are using us for our marketplace of suppliers. But quite recently, we've had a number of larger independents. When I say larger, sort of multi-branch, 10 to 15 branch firms, where we've engaged with their relationships. So we've created a marketplace for that business, which is exactly the same suppliers that they want to use and control. And in a number of circumstances, in fact, our first completion that went through the system for one of our businesses is a 10-branch agency up in the sort of Derbyshire area. We'd actually worked quite hard providing them with 6, maybe 7 local solicitor relationships that they wanted to use. And their first completion that went through the system went through in under 7 weeks. Now, they were running at around about 12 and a half weeks.
Okay, so that's a worthwhile difference.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming the next part of the roadmap was probably doing the same thing with the financing side to try and engage. So you would say that at the moment both of those elements in terms of the financing and the conveyancing are in good shape. That agents can benefit. Those parts of the system have been developed enough to make a difference.
Very much so. I mean, if you condense that down, our business model is very much aligned to the estate agency business model, which is all predicated on making money from a transaction, and it's very much no sell, no fee. So, if we don't generate transactions and revenue, successful
people won't
transactions,
recommend you or come back to you. Yeah, it's the usual thing. I mean, I do think that the goal is a really laudable one. I think the idea that people can just log in with one login and communicate easily. Okay, well, I'm a bit clearer now on what you were talking about. Let's move on to the next element of what Babek and OneDome have been doing, and I'm sure you've been heavily involved in as well, which is the portal.
Yes.
Portal wars. I mean, you made a point off air before we started that actually there's no winners and losers. I mean, financially for the portals themselves, there will be winners and losers, but actually people just have to look at what's best for them.
Yeah,
in all
absolutely.
Of this. And certainly, it appears to me that the portal. I mean, having been involved in the on the market sort of launch and everything myself, and been a big fan. I was a big fan of the original concept of it. That obviously then changed for whatever reason. And I think that it was very, very disappointing that the agents didn't, which is fairly typical of the way agency works. Estate agency really is the last bastion of the proper old-fashioned entrepreneur. You don't need there are no barriers to entry. Most of the people that tend to run the small independent agents, which are the vast majority of estate agents,
they are,
tend to be real proper old-fashioned entrepreneurs. They're normally middle-aged, probably male, and they don't like the idea of doing something if someone down the street isn't doing it. They think, well, if we all do this is fine. But
sort of a herd mentality.
Yes, and it was, and I'm sad that didn't work out. But the frustration with the marketing of estate agents' properties on these publicly facing portals is that not only do you pay to give them the information, but they can then use the information as they want, which just has always seemed to me madness. So
some of them make an awful lot of money out of
some of them do make an awful lot of money, and having sold my Rightmove shares about a year and a half ago, thinking that they couldn't possibly carry on in the way they were going, and of course now they have carried on. Anyway, whatever. So bearing in mind there are no rights and wrongs, just talk me through what the portal offering is.
Yeah, again, that can be utilised by any agent in isolation, so you don't have to have the other technology that's available.
Oh, okay, they can just do that separately.
Absolutely,
just as a separate thing. Okay.
Again, we try to do this in a way that again was more aligned to generating successful transactions for agents, because ultimately that's what they make their money from. Yeah. So our business interest with an agent is very much aligned from a portal aspect as well, because it's a free-to-list model, so it costs them nothing to actually advertise their properties on OneDome. That normally raises the first sceptical question, which is, okay, free, how do you make your money? Again, like I said, we're already proving that we can make money, small margins, through some of the other services that we have, such as mortgages, conveyancing.
So this is where the person that goes on the portal to look at the property then decides they want to use one of the services. So how does the agent earn from that? So let's say that someone's going on the OneDome portal looking for a property, sees a property from an agent. then decides they quite like that, they want to go and see whether they can borrow some money against it. Is that where the agent earn? Is that how the agent would earn if they then eventually do buy that property? And
absolutely.
What happens if they go on the portal and it's another agent's property, but they've firstly engaged with the?
Well, if they've already instructed, it's the same financial dynamics that are in play every day on the high street at the moment. So you have some quite aggressive cross-sale estate agency businesses that. Let's say they sign somebody up for a mortgage or get a consumer off the back of a viewing in front of their mortgage broker, and they quite like the broker, and they start engaging with that broker, but that person doesn't end up actually buying a property through that agent. Well, they buy through the guy next door, or whoever it is. The first agent actually makes some money out of the mortgage.
Right. Okay. So it's the same model from that point of view.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So at this stage, you feel that the way the question you get asked is, hang on a minute, free, which I agree with you. A lot of agents go, hang on a minute, it's free. How do you make your money? So effectively referrals.
Yes, referrals, and they're two ways. So we can generate referrals into the estate agency business exactly the same as they're used to with other portal relationships, but we do it for free. So viewing requests and leads that are flowing in every day from the other main three portals, they can do that with OneDome at absolutely no cost. In fact, our contract protects them in a way, because I think a few of them have had their fingers burnt over the years with various other models where we physically can't charge them anything for that for the next 100 years. We wanted to say forever.
Okay, well, I suppose 100 years will do it. But the one question that I would have thought, the second question you get after saying, how do you make your money, is the reason that the model sort of works at the moment and the estate agents will pay the money is, of course, that Rightmove and Zoopla and On the Market spend a fortune advertising their services on TV.
Yes.
How does OneDome get its portals? How does it get eyes on its portal?
Yeah, well, we need agent support. It's as simple as that. Now, we don't have a £40 million a year, TV marketing budget at the moment. We are, however, successfully driving an awful lot of consumer traffic through our portal service, which only launched eight months ago. So within 8 months, we've gone from no listings on OneDome, because it wasn't a portal before, to over 420,000 listings. There's now over 5,000 branches of agents within the OneDome ecosystem in terms of the portal side. But really importantly, over 15 million consumers in terms of eyeballs each month. So,
but how does the agent, or how does, you say by getting agent involvement you can get eyes on the portal, but how does that work? Because obviously the agents want to drive traffic to their own website, not to OneDome's website. So other than advertising it, how do consumers find out about the OneDome portal?
We do an awful lot of clever things in the digital marketing space, which is the most effective bang for our buck at the moment. At some point, your traditional TV, radio, billboard type campaigns will obviously need to be there from our point of view in terms of raising the bar when it comes to consumer awareness about our brand. But we're finding if you like, the modern consumer engaging with a new service digitally is actually a lot easier than we first thought.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because I come definitely from the old school, which imagines that people have to see it on TV. But equally, I'm aware that there are some other players in what I would call the smart search. I mean, I think obviously before I met you, I wanted to just try out the portal myself. And I think the other thing that I noticed that was a bit different with it was the way in which you search for properties. I've been very frustrated over the years when I've been looking on, the traditional
filtered
portals.
lists.
Well, it is absurd how old-fashioned it is, and with some of the portals, you're not even allowed to leave their ecosystem and go to the agent's website.
Yeah.
And the idea that you have to do different searches for different areas, most people, particularly young people these days, when they go to live in a city, town area, they just want to be near the stuff they like, and they want to be able to put in some Google, for want of an expression, style search terms.
That was exactly our approach.
And I think the smart search thing is very much part of the change, and I think that's something I really like. There are other players in the market trying to launch themselves and trying to provide different methods of searching and using the digital environment, digital sphere, ecosystem to try and market their businesses. But I think what you've been doing has got a lead. I mean, as I said, I've become very well aware of the business, and I'm fascinated by initially the slowness of take-up, secondly, the confusion around what you were doing, and I think you've been really good at clearing that up. I think that's been really helpful. Do you feel that if agents do go to the website, if they feel that any of this has sort of rung a bell with them, do you feel that the website gives them enough to be able to get that information and then get in touch with you? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's enough there. I think we could probably do certain bits of that better, but we're always trying to improve everything that we do. The challenge that we always have, even though we have a very large development resource, is it's nearly always at maximum capacity in terms of building and iterating. So we employ over 40 guys that are very, very bright in terms of speaking binary and all the clever things that they're doing on the tech development point of view, but we could probably double that and still not have enough.
Okay.
But obviously, the budget and everything else obviously has
No,
constraints.
sure. You've got to stick to what you do and do it well. And I think it's been really helpful to listen to what you're saying. And for me, bearing in mind that, crikey, as many as half the people out there, estate agents, don't have any sort of CRM or system that handles what they do on a day-to-day basis. In fact, they still work in the same way that you and I used to, with a hot box, a viewing box, a bunch of keys, and that's it. And I think that's fine as long as the consumers, i.e. the people that are buying, are sort of age, i.e. a bit older. But once you get my kids, who are sort of in their mid-20s, 26, 27, they are not going to want to operate in that way. No. They are going to want to operate in a whole new way. And I think it's partly why the letting system, which I don't think OneDome engages with, does it at the moment?
It's certain elements of it, but we had to prioritise which... We couldn't do both at the same time.
No, that's entirely fair enough, and they are very different. And I think part of the reason they're very different is that the consumer on the letting side tends to be younger, hence why it's got more digitised and is changing much more rapidly than the sales side. But I can't remember what the average age of a first-time buyer is, or a buyer these days, but it's certainly well into the 30s.
Yeah.
And
probably
as that
over
comes
40.
as that comes down, I think the way that people engage will be much more technical. And to be blunt, my opinion is that I think a lot of the agents out there will need to be engaged with companies like OneDome, which are leading the charge for consumer interaction with agents, mortgage brokers, conveyancers, all those sort of guys. It's a complicated process out there, and I really admire the way you guys are trying to do that more simply. So, thanks for coming in, Tim. And
it's a pleasure. Thanks.
I look forward to continuing to see the development of the business. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ed.